It's safe to say the last month has been a pretty wild ride for Nintendo, as not only have we seen the release of the Nintendo Switch 2, we've also seen some of the best games of 2025 be released, and arguably also some of the worst. And today we're going to be going through all of them, both for the Nintendo Switch and for the Nintendo Switch 2. Now, first up on today's list is Rune Factory Guardians of Azuma, which it turns out I've been saying wrong for the longest time, but at least we got it right today. Now, this is the latest game in the Rune Factory series, although this isn't a mainline title, as this is actually more of a spin-off, as the focus in this game is less so on the farming and more so not only on the story, but also the town building aspects. And the way I'd sort of describe this game is being half RPG and half town management. You see, the game begins with you being thrown into the land of Azuma, a land that is in dire need of help. As not only has all of the life across it withered and died, there's also this thing called blight that is spreading across the land, killing everything that is left. And in order to not only help the people, but to also bring Azuma back to life, you need to find and strengthen each of the gods of the land. And that not only involves traveling an awful lot in order to try and find them, but also means that you need to build up the towns to strengthen them. Now, this was my first real dive into the Rune Factory series, and this game honestly really surprised me. The story itself was a lot of fun. Not only was there a lot of twists and turns that I didn't expect, the characters themselves were well written and really fun to get to know, so I'm really glad they added relationship mechanics to it. The only thing I think that was off with the story was probably its pacing. There were times where it was really slow and it felt a little bit bloated, and by the end of the game things felt incredibly combat heavy, which was a very different change of pace to all of the rest of the game. The nice thing is though, when you do want to take a break from the mainline story, you can start engaging in the town building mechanics. And honestly, I think they might have given us too much to do with this aspect, as you're actually in charge of not one, but 4 separate towns. And in each of the towns, you can collect resources, craft different buildings and decorations, and then place them wherever you want within the select areas of each of the towns. But the town management mechanics don't end there, as you're also in charge of the town's people as well. And the more you level up each of the towns, the more people you can have in each of them. And this is where it really differs from the likes of the other Rune Factory games, because even though you can do a lot of your classic farming sim mechanics, like fishing, farming, taking care of animals, and of course foraging, you personally don't actually have to do any of them. And what you can do instead is just send off the townspeople to do it for you. And that way you can focus on the story, building up and leveling up the town even more, and of course trying to romance your favorite NPC. I think the main drawback of Rune Factory is the fact that they tried to do a little bit of everything. And I was thinking about the best way to try and put this, and I think it's that it does a lot of elements of different games incredibly well, but it doesn't excel anywhere. Like the town building, the relationship mechanics, and even to a certain extent the story. They're all great, but they're all relatively surface level. Like, for example, the story doesn't come with a huge amount of cutscenes. So a lot of the times the characters talk about doing things, but you don't necessarily see them do them. The combat itself was good, although it was a little bit frustrating at times, especially when you have to do a lot of combat like in the later game. Like, for example, the camera's auto lock had some real issues, especially if you were going against bosses that were very tall. Although I did definitely appreciate that if you were low on health, you could literally pause a fight at any moment to eat food. And I also had some issues when it came to festivals. You see, this game involves a lot of characters, and sometimes when they don't spawn in the right place on a festival day, you kind of get stuck being unable to do the festival at all. And I went to Reddit and I tried as many of the tips and tricks that were said there to get the festivals to work, and I just could not trigger it and ended up having to miss it entirely. Now, in terms of whether you should buy this on the Switch or the Switch 2, I've been showing a mixture of the footage up on the screen now. The Switch 2 version is more expensive, and even though you don't get anything extra for your your money, you do get an increased resolution and frame rate, and I do believe the loading times are a lot shorter on the Switch 2 as well. That being said, the only thing that makes me hesitant to fully recommend this is honestly its price. It just seems to be lacking a little bit of polish that you'd expect for the price tag that they're charging. There's definitely some bugs here and there because the game is just so massive. It is a big game with a lot to do, but it just doesn't quite look like a Nintendo first party game does, and if you're charging the same price as it, you've got to be willing to compete. So the way I see it is this is a must buy if it goes on sale. Next up we have Tamagotchi Plaza. Now this was a game I was really looking forward to. I was so excited I went and bought a Tamagotchi Uni as I found out that this was compatible with Tamagotchi Plaza. But unfortunately, this is a game that let me down massively, as it was nothing like what I was expecting. Now it is worth noting that this was my very first Tamagotchi game, as even though I have played Tamagotchis, I've never played any of the games in this series, so other than seeing the trailer, I really didn't know what to expect. Now at the start, the game seemed to be pretty promising. It begins with the Tamagotchi King announcing that he wants to hold a festival, and that all of the towns on Tamagotchi Planet will be competing to try and host it. And it'll be up to you to help the prince turn the town of Tamako into a lively place to hold the festival. The issue is the town right now is in a pretty dire state and stands no chance in winning whatsoever. So in order to up your chances, you need to improve the town by upgrading each of the shops and also upgrading the plaza itself. But it turns out that the entire storyline for the game is told to you within the first 5 minutes. And from this point onwards, all the game really comprises of is minigames. Now, first off, I was a little bit sad to see that you don't even get to make your own Tamagotchi character. Instead, you just have to pick between a few of the characters and decide which one you effectively want to be. The gameplay itself is then pretty simple. You walk around the plaza and decide which of the 12 shops, if you're on the Nintendo Switch, or 15 shops if you're on the Switch 2, you want to go and work in. Now, if you're looking for a proper shop sim management game, this is not it. Because in order to run each of these shops, all you really need to do is play a specific minigame. And these minigames definitely do vary a lot between each of the stores. Upgrading each of the shops is also pretty simple. All you need to do is play the minigame long enough that the prince will eventually show up. And if you successfully serve him, then you'll be given the chance to upgrade the shop to the next level. And this just basically adds on another element to the minigame, and that's more or less it. You also then have the option to use the money that you've earned from working in the shop to upgrade different elements of the plaza, all in the hopes of raising your chances of holding the Tamagotchi festival. Now, I did encounter a few issues when I was playing these minigames. First of all, we have the fact that none of them, apart from a few on the Switch 2 version, had any tutorials. So you just had to play the minigame and hope that you could figure out what on earth you were doing. Now, some minigames were pretty straightforward to figure out, and other minigames I had to look up walkthroughs for because I, for the life of me, couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong. The sushi minigame was definitely one of them. The other issue I found is just not all of the minigames were all that much fun to play. I found that on average, it took me about 20 minutes of playing the minigames non-stop to be given the chance for them to be upgraded. And even though some minigames were pretty fun, like I really liked the pool minigame, for example, others felt an awful lot like a chore to play. Like the dentist, for example, was definitely not my favorite. And I just didn't really feel like there was much purpose to anything that I was doing. There really wasn't much character interaction or story all throughout the game after the beginning, which just made everything feel a little bit pointless. And in order to complete the game, you're gonna have to play and master every single one of the shops. So that means that if there's a mini game that you don't enjoy, you're gonna have to endure it till the very end if you want to complete the game. But the thing is, there were little glimmers of how good this game could have been if they spent a little bit more time making it. The dialogue at the beginning was funny and witty, and I really enjoyed it, and I would have loved to have seen more of that throughout the entire game. Some elements of the shop mini games were also absolutely wild and and wacky, and if they just expanded those elements a bit more into the whole game, I think it would have been something far more interesting. Like, take for example, the gym. Did anyone really need to see a Tamagotchi with 6-pack abs or with teeny tiny biceps? No, but this game delivered on that front fantastically. And if these glimmers of personality in the game had carried through further to other mini games and more dialogue, I think this would have been a far more exciting and more enjoyable experience. I think the part though that really hurts the most is its price tag, as not only is the Switch price pretty expensive for what it is, which is essentially a series of mini games without a whole lot of story, the Switch 2 price tag is even worse. And I honestly didn't notice a huge difference in the graphics between the Switch and the Switch 2 version, but you do get the 3 additional shops. And even though I thought this was exactly what I was looking for, it turns out it didn't deliver on anything that I wanted. The next game we're going to talk about is Split Fiction. Now this is a little bit different to everything else that's on this list, as this game has been out on other platforms for a while, but it is so good I really wanted to talk about it here. Now I do think it is worth noting that although the Switch 2 version does look good, it's definitely not as pretty as it looks on other platforms, so if you have any other type of console you might prefer to buy it on that, but I'm honestly not mad at how the Switch 2 version has been playing. Now I truthfully thought that when It Takes Two came out that there would be no two-player experience that could top that. And honestly, even when I saw the trailer for Split Fiction, I was still pretty confident in thinking that. But it turns out I was incredibly wrong, and I think Split Fiction is even better than It Takes Two. But the two things these games have in common is the fact that they make you work together in a way no game ever has before. Because Split Fiction is a two-player game. You have to play it with someone else. And it will require you to coordinate, communicate, and work together in order to best each of the levels in completely different ways. Now, the story itself follows Mio and Zoe, two very contrasting writers, with one of them writing fantasy and the other sci-fi. But after they find themselves hooked up to a machine that is designed to steal all of their ideas, they decide to work together to try and get out of this mess. And the way this machine actually works is it makes them experience their very own stories. But because there's two of them trapped in this machine instead of just the one person like it's meant to be, this means they switch between being in fantasy worlds filled with ogres and dragons and other things you can't even imagine, to then being thrown into sci-fi worlds instead. And they have to rely on each other's knowledge of the stories to try and get through each of these levels. And the beautiful thing is, even though you're going through stories that they've written, throughout the game you'll get to learn about their personal stories. And you get to see their relationship grow as they work together more. Now, as I said earlier, the game is split into different levels, and each level will kind of give your character a different ability, which often isn't that useful by itself, but it tends to pair beautifully with the other characters' abilities. And the thing I truly couldn't get over is how many different ways the game finds to make you work together. Now, I will say, I think this is harder than It Takes Two, so I definitely think this is a game to play with a fellow gamer. I think if you're trying to play this to someone who's very new to gaming, there's certain parts that they will struggle with, but even so, it was an awful lot of fun. And I think the only thing better than all the co-op mechanics is just how fantastic the story was. So if you have someone in your life that you would love to play games with, I think this game is a must buy. It is absolutely fantastic, and I just wish they released a proper physical version and didn't shove a code in a box, as that is the worst thing about it. Next up, let's talk about Survival Kids. Now, I haven't seen many people talk about this, which is wild as it was technically a launch game for the Switch 2. And this is another co-op experience, only this one I don't recommend nearly as much as Split Fiction. Now, essentially, this game just sees you be shipwrecked on different islands. And the goal is to work your way across the island and find each of the pieces of your raft so you can craft it back together. But it's not as simple as just freely walking around the island and finding the bits and pieces that you need, as each island is filled with puzzles that you'll need to solve in order to progress further through each of the islands. And with each island that you visit, the puzzles get progressively harder. But compared to the likes of Split Fiction, this really isn't as creative with how you need to work together, as especially at the beginning, a lot of the puzzles basically rely on you being able to move items from one point to another. And even though it does introduce certain items like fishing rods to try and spice up the puzzle mechanics just a little bit, at no point did I find this particularly difficult to figure out, even towards the later islands. I truthfully think this game is more being aimed at people playing it with their kids. I think those are the people who are going to be the most happy with it. I also think this is a game best enjoyed with as many people as possible, as even though you can play this as just one person, I really don't think you're going to have a great time playing it like that. So I think this is best played with 4 people. Now the nice thing is you don't all need to own the game to play together due to game share, and you can play with people on the Switch as well. But I personally just feel like this was a little bit expensive for what you get, and even though each level does have some hidden items for you to find, it does feel a little bit repetitive, especially at the beginning. So I don't necessarily think this is a don't buy, I just think that this game isn't for everyone. Next up is Fantasy Life-I, the girl who steals time. Now I know I've talked about this in multiple videos so far, and I have a whole review about it, but if we're going to talk about the games to buy and the games not to buy, I have to talk about by far my favorite release of 2025. Now I've had a lot of people ask if they should buy Rune Factory or Fantasy Life, and if I had to pick one out of the two, it would definitely have to be Fantasy Life. This truthfully just has everything that I've been looking for in a cozy game. It has a story that was really fun to play through from start to finish. It has in-depth mechanics that have been fun to master. And even though I've finished the story already, it's a game which I can just keep on playing. And the best part is, not only are they still doing bug patches and quality of life stuff, they're also giving us a free DLC that should be coming sometime soon. But the reason why I can't stop picking up Fantasy Life is just because it is so much fun to play. As not only do you have the main story to play that will take you a solid 30 or so hours, there's also an open world area for you to explore with different challenges inside of it. There's randomized dungeons that you can explore with friends to get rare loot, and there's a ton of quests for you to complete even after you've done the mainline story. That means that you could easily get 70 plus hours, if not more, out of this game if you wanted to. And even though I did really enjoy the story, I definitely understand why some people say that the real game doesn't start till the story's finished. Now the story is definitely a lot more simple and a lot more playful than Rune Factory Guardians of Azuma, as the game begins with you being washed ashore an island filled with ancient ruins. But before you can really figure out what on earth is going on, you find yourself transported 1,000 years into the past, only to find that the island that was once filled with ruins is now a bustling town. And you'll find yourself traveling between the past and the present to piece together exactly what's happened. And it will also become your job to build up the town from the ground up in the present. So this means that not only do you have all of the gameplay aspects I told you about earlier, but you also get the ability to build up and decorate the entire town in some very Animal Crossing-like ways. And even though this does combine a lot of gameplay elements, it somehow just works with all of them together. Now I will say this is a pretty pricey game on the Switch. It is full Nintendo price. However, you do get an awful lot for your money, and I personally think it's worth it, albeit the graphics on the Switch not being that great. The Switch 2 version, however, is actually, I think, pretty good value for money. It costs less than £2 to upgrade from the Switch version to the Switch 2, and even though you don't get any extra content, the game looks incredible on the Switch 2. And actually recently they just did a Switch 2 patch to make the graphics look even better, especially in handheld mode. So the game looks better than ever now. Although you can still see the line if you go into the town, which is so annoying. So we're still waiting for them to patch that out. But as I said before, this is hands down my favorite game of 2025 so far, and I cannot recommend it enough. Okay, I think it's time to talk about Welcome Tour. Honestly, there is nothing I can say about Welcome Tour that would justify the fact that this was not a free game with the Switch 2. And I honestly think the word game isn't really the most suited to what this actually is. This kind of feels like it is part exam and part, well, tech demo. I might be being a little bit dramatic when I say exam. It's more like an informational section. Now, the whole game takes place on a Nintendo Switch 2, and you can walk up to these different areas that have sort of like these board things that are set up, and on them you can read a whole lot of information about a single aspect of the Switch 2. And even though it did teach us some interesting things, like for example, it teaches you why the Switch 2 has a little bit of give. It also gives you a little hint into the future. So for example, it talks about the Joy-Con colors and about how you can just take the sticker out that's inside of these and replace it with another color if you get different colored Joy-Cons. And then after you've read all the flyers, you're then given an exam. Yeah, that part wasn't so fun. The second part of the game is the tech demo side of things, and they showcase this with little mini games. Now, it is worth noting that depending on what you own already, you might not get to play all of the mini games, because some of the mini games require you to have the webcam or a webcam, and other mini games either require you to have a monitor that's capable of HDR or a monitor that's capable of having a 120 Hz refresh rate. If you don't have those, then some of these mini games can't be played. And even though you can technically 100% the game without them, it's still sad to see that you can't access the whole of a game that, again, should have been free. So even though this is only £7, it's not worth it. If you really want to check it out, try and borrow it from a friend instead of paying any money towards this. The next game I want to talk about is Date Everything. And I am going to be incredibly careful with not only the words I use to describe this game, but also the footage that I show you on the screen, because this is incredibly 18 plus. If you've never heard of this game, everything that I'm going to tell you is going to be such a wild ride from beginning to end. Now, the game begins with you losing your job because you have been replaced with AI. But shortly after your dismissal, you find some sunglasses have been delivered to your house. And after putting these glasses on, you find that they have the ability to turn all of the inanimate objects in your house into dateable characters. I did warn you this was going to be a wild ride. Now, this game has over 100 dateable characters in it, and each of them are fully voice acted. And the aim of the game is, you guessed it, to date every single item in your house. Or you also have the option to befriend them. You don't actually have to date everyone. But the thing is, depending on which of the dialogue options you choose, this will determine whether a character will end up falling in love with you, friend zoning you, or hating you. Because yeah, they can actually wind up not liking you at all. Now, because this game was my very first dating sim, I was a little bit worried that the whole game's premise would get old really quickly. But thankfully, the writing is so good that that wasn't the case at all. Each of the characters have their very own distinctive personalities that's made even better by the voice acting. Some of the characters will wind up interacting with other characters as well, and there's also an overarching story to everything that you do as well, which just means that the whole game has a little bit more purpose than just being a game where you try and date as many people as possible. The only thing that I found a little bit disappointing when I was playing this is once you finish a whole character's story, the next time you talk to them, they just say the same one line over and over again, which made me a little bit sad when I had a few favorites that I wanted to go back to and speak to. One thing to bear in mind though is that this game is just a Nintendo Switch game, which means this has some major drawbacks if you are playing this on the Switch 2, particularly in handheld. Because if you play this on the Switch 2, then you're having the 720p resolution of the Switch put on your 1080p screen. And considering the game itself doesn't have a lot of movement to it and is mostly just text on a screen, it is really noticeable that it is slightly blurry when you play on the Switch too. One thing that will help though is going in your settings and making sure that you have the HDR settings set to compatible software only. That did help a bunch, especially on the TV, but it is sad to see that it doesn't look quite as good on the Switch 2 as it could. The other thing that is very important to bear in mind is this is a very, very adult game. Now, they do have a pretty robust content warning system, and this will tell you about anything from triggers to there being some very 18 plus content about to be had. So you can choose whether you want to experience it or skip it, which I really do appreciate seeing. But yeah, it can get pretty out there at times, so you've had your warning. But overall, I had a blast. I can recommend this to you whether you've played a dating sim before or if this is your first one. I had a great time. The final game on today's list is another I don't want to spend too long talking about because we've talked about it before, but this is Mario Kart World. Let's just get the big question out of the way. Is this worth $80? In its current state, no, I don't think so. Could it be worth $80 in the future? Maybe, but we don't know what on earth Nintendo is planning, so we gotta go with how the game is right now. Now, for the price I paid for the bundle, which I think was around £40, the game is definitely worthwhile, and I genuinely think I've got my money's worth already. And even though I didn't feel like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe needed an upgrade, this really does feel like it's had one. Because having 24 players is more chaotic than ever before and makes even the most boring of tracks feel exciting. But we've also got the introduction of the knockout mode, which I think is absolutely incredible. And this is the mode I play the most of when I play online. But I think it is worth mentioning that as much fun as I've been having with the game, there are a few ways Nintendo could definitely improve it. First of all, we have the character selection. Why did they put every individual outfit as a brand new character? It's made it such a mess to go and select which character you want to use. We also have the more recent update, which hasn't gone down well, and that's the fact that Nintendo have gotten rid of the ability to do 3-lap races in the traditional sense when you play online. I definitely think Nintendo should just give us the option, as clearly people want to do it, to just switch between them. You've given us wonderful courses, why not let people do 3 laps of them if they really want? I know one of the big draw points in Mario Kart World was the fact that you do a race between each of the races and then you finish with 1 lap of the course that you're on. But for a lot of people, they want to see more of the courses and play those more, so it should just be an option. That's it for all of the games that I've been playing recently. Let me know some of your favorites in the comments down below, and if you want to see my review of the Switch 2 a couple of weeks in, click this video here.